The PSP was a game changer when it launched in 2005, a handheld that delivered a true home console experience that fit in your pocket, with graphics nearly on par with the PS2. While you could hook it up to a TV with proprietary component cables, being tethered to the screen held it back from being a true home console experience. But now, two modders have fixed that with a fully consoleized PSP, complete with wireless controller support, and yes, you can even play your physical UMDs, bringing the PSP experience to the big screen. So let's dive in and check it out. Hey everyone, how's it going? My name is Tito and welcome to another episode of Retro Renew. Today we're going to be taking a look at a mod that I've honestly been waiting such a long time for, and well, it's finally here. This is the PlayStation Placeable, a mod that transforms your PSP handheld into a dedicated home console, allowing you to enjoy it on the big screen. And given the PSP's impressive graphical capabilities for a portable device, it truly feels right at home when played on a larger display. And to top it all off, it's housed in a sleek shell that pays homage to its more powerful sibling, the PS2. But the real icing on the cake, at least for me, is the fact that it retains the UMD drive, making this feel like a true bona fide home console. The PSP Placeable is the brainchild of two very talented modders named Dan and Steven. I'm actually going to quickly turn it over to Dan to tell us a bit more about the mod itself, as well as the inspiration behind it.
Thanks, Tito. My name's Dan, and I've been working on this Bluetooth PSP mod project with Stefan Cooper. He has done the Bluetooth mod, the coding, the web app. So much of the work has been Stefan's. My responsibility was designing the shell that would house the PSP and the mod board. What I really wanted to focus on was keeping access to those UMDs. I'm a huge collector of physical games. I hated the idea of buying digital games when I already owned a physical copy. I also wanted to keep the build as easy as possible. I wanted to focus on people who maybe have never done a mod before, and they see this video and think, I can do that too. Tito's videos were a huge inspiration to me, and I hope that maybe one of you watching will start your own modding journey. At the very least, some of you will get the chance to play PSP games in a whole new way. Now back to you, Tito.
Thanks, Dan. So yeah, this is a fantastic way to enjoy the PSP in a totally different way. Now when it comes to the kit itself, there are actually several options that you can take. One thing, however, to keep in mind first is that the kit is only compatible with 2000 and 3000 model systems. So unfortunately, the OG 1000 is not supported. If you go to their website, Retro Gameworks, you can pick up a fully made turnkey system for around $270, which actually does include the PSP system itself. Or you can mail in your own PSP console and have Dan build the kit for you. That'll run you about $100 cheaper at $185. Additionally, you can buy both the main board, which enables Bluetooth controller support, as well as the 3D printed shell with all the necessary hardware. This will cost you $40 and $15 respectively, or a total of $55 for the full kit. And that's actually what Dan sent me. The custom Bluetooth board fully assembled, as well as the shell in this beautiful blue color, along with all of the various components. That way I can show you DIYers out there how to install the kit yourself. Now, in addition to being able to buy these kits directly from Dan and Steven from their website, they actually also provide instructions on how to build these custom boards using a service like PCBWay. Although in this case, it probably is more economical to purchase directly from Retro Gameworks, since buying an individual board from PCBWay will likely cost you almost double. Their website is actually really well made, and it guides you through the process of purchasing or building the kits yourself, all the way through the installation of the kit onto the PSP, as well as how to configure your Bluetooth controller. It's really quite comprehensive and well organized. I also love that they open source the project, meaning that you can make the board yourself and you can even print your own shell, which actually brings me to the sponsor of today's video, PCBWay. If you have an idea for a new mod or want to assemble an open source project, PCBWay provides you with the tools to make them a reality. From 3D printing services in an array of materials, all the way to other services like CNC machining, injection molding, and of course PCB and flex ribbon fabrication. So when it comes to taking your retro mods to the next level, PCBWay is the place to make that happen. Check out the link in the description for PCBWay to get $5 off your first order. And again, a huge thank you to PCBWay for sponsoring this video. All right, with that out of the way, let's go ahead and put together the PlayStation Placeable. All right, so the first thing we need to do is actually load the firmware onto the Bluetooth board. Don't be like me and realize when you're pretty much done with the mod that you forgot to do this step, which is why you see cables all over the place connected to the board. To do this, you will need to plug your board to your PC through the micro USB port and head over to the web app site. I'll leave a link to the guide that goes over this step in detail down below in the description. Anyway, once the Bluetooth board has the firmware loaded, we need to then disassemble our donor PSP console. We don't want to completely tear it apart since we basically just need to access the motherboard. The PSP that I'll be disassembling is a 3000 revision, but again, the RetroModWorks website has detailed teardown instructions for both the 3000 and 2000 model PSPs. Anyway, if you have a 3000 model PSP like I do, you can follow along with me. Okay, so with the PSP disassembled to where we need it to be, grab the power cable we removed since we're going to need to splice it and extend the wires. Before cutting it, however, I strongly suggest you indicate which wire is positive and negative like I did. I used a multimeter to do this, or to make this even simpler, you can order this cable already spliced from the Retro Gameworks store. Anyway, here you can see how I spliced both sides of the power wire to give it ample length, which is necessary for the next step. What we're going to do is grab our Bluetooth board and locate the pad labeled power. We're going to take the two positive wires from our spliced cable and solder here to this pad. Then we're going to do the same thing to the two negative wires to the pad labeled ground. And once we're done, our two spliced cables should be connected to the Bluetooth board as shown. Now this next step is optional, but what I'll be doing is removing the status LED and soldering two wires to the pads so that I can relocate the LED later on in the installation. One thing to note is that the bottom pad with the red wire I attached is positive. Once that's done, we can start to install our ribbon cables. We're going to start with this one here because you'll notice it looks like it's too small for this connector. Well, that was done on purpose because the board is meant to be compatible with both the 2000 and 3000 model PSPs, and unfortunately, they have one ribbon cable that's different, this one. Now, when installing this cable for the 3000 PSP like mine, you do need to install it as far to the left as possible as shown here. You basically want the ribbon butted up against the left side of the connector, and then you're going to lock the bail once it's there. Now, this small ribbon, which is for the analog stick, is installed with the pins facing up. All the other cables are installed with the blue tab facing up, and I'm told this will be changed in a future revision, but in my particular revision, the pins need to be installed facing up. Then we can go ahead and install the two remaining ribbons. I definitely refer to the RetroModWorks website for the latest installation instructions in case any of these steps do change. And this is how all the ribbons should look like when they're fully installed, and do take note that this connector here is left empty on purpose. Alright, now we can start to prep the bottom shell. After installing the buttons, we can drop in the power port that we recently spliced and secure it with one of the black screws we removed during the PSP disassembly. Next, grab the included retaining bracket and fish all the ribbon cables and wires through it as we attach it to the Bluetooth board and secure it to the bottom shell. In order to secure the board, we're going to again reuse 4 of the black screws that we removed from the PSP during disassembly. Next, we're going to go ahead and grab the mid frame and again fish all the wires and ribbon cables through it. Once it's properly seated, we can secure it to the bottom shell using 4 of the included long screws. Now, when fastening these screws, you'll note that they are fully seated once they are flush with the midframe as shown here. This is actually really important as the screws serve a dual purpose, which we'll see here in just a minute. Next, go ahead and grab the PSP and set it next to the shell so that we can connect all the ribbon cables to the PSP motherboard. I'm going to first install the ribbon for the analog stick. The important thing to note here is that when it is fully seated, do not lock the bail as it will most likely break since the ribbon is quite a bit thicker than the original analog stick ribbon. Anyway, once that's done, go ahead and connect the other cables. Again, I would refer to the Retro ModWorks website for further instructions and details in case things are updated. And here you can see the LED that I soldered to those wires from a while back, which is nicely located here in the corner. Great. Once all the cables are installed, we can go ahead and place the PSP into the shell as shown. And then secure it with 4 of the silver screws that we removed from the PSP during disassembly. Now grab the top shell and we're going to go ahead and press in the included magnets. Do note that these will be stacked in 2s for each of the 4 corners. And then we can place the top onto the console and the magnets will align with those longer screws that we used to secure the midframe. That's the dual purpose I was speaking of. And lastly, we'll go ahead and install the included rubber feet into each of the 4 corners. And there you have it, folks, the PS Placeable fully built. Overall, I absolutely love the relative simplicity of the build process, which requires minimal soldering. The hardest part was splicing and extending the power cable, but that can actually be purchased separately as an option, making the overall build even easier. And the results speak for themselves. They're fantastic. The video out of the PSP is very good and looks surprisingly fantastic on the big screen for a handheld console that's nearly 20 years old at this point. Anyway, let's take a look at the features that the PS Placeable brings to the table. So to hook the console up to the TV, Dan made a clever design choice of having the top easily removable thanks to the integrated magnets. Popping the top off gives us access to the AV port. Once plugged in, we can route the wire through the integrated opening around back, and then plug the unit to power. Now to get the PSP started for the first time, we need to press the mode button on the bottom of the system. You'll notice that the LED will blink twice repeatedly. This means that the Placeable is in pairing mode. So what you can do now is take your controller, I'm using a PS4 one, and then also put that into pairing mode. And then you'll notice that it'll quickly pair to the console once you get a solid LED color. That means that the controller has been paired and we're off to the races. Now, if you're using a PS4 or PS5 controller, which I do strongly recommend, the button mappings are basically good to go and you're ready to play PSP games. You can of course remap the buttons if you want to, but I'll get into that in a moment. Now, as far as video quality is concerned, I think it looks fantastic. Since the AV cables for the PSP are component, I have it connected to my retro tank, which is then connected to my small LCD monitor here. With the current settings that I have on the retro tank, it looks great. I will talk about this more in the pros and cons section of the video, but it does take some tweaking of the settings on my scaler to get the video output to take up the whole screen and make it look pretty nice. Anyway, taking a look around the unit, we do of course have access to the memory stick, which was cleverly implemented here with this adapter piece. It goes in and comes out fairly smoothly, and I'm glad we do have easy access to the memory stick, especially if you have a PSP that is jailbroken. Taking a look at the bottom of the console, we have 3 buttons. For the most part, you won't be messing with these too often, but probably the most important one is this one here labeled Mode. This is what allows us to put the console into pairing mode, allowing us to connect different controllers, and by holding it down for a couple seconds, it enters into Bluetooth mode, which is what we need in order to connect the console to the computer so that we can update the firmware over the air or configure the buttons of the controller. The reset button is really only used if you find yourself in sort of a loop where you're having issues pairing a controller or having issues in general. And the boot button has no real user function and is instead pretty much used for debugging purposes. Now, moving our attention to the top of the unit, we have the UMD drive. For me, it was vitally important to keep the UMD in order to have that authentic home console experience. There's just something about using physical media with retro consoles, especially a format as unique as the UMD. Being able to play my physical games as well as UMD movies is really awesome. Now, unfortunately, in my case, the PSP I used for this build is a Japanese unit, which means my North American region UMD movies don't work. But it's pretty neat that we can use it as a way to watch movies, as completely unnecessary as that may be, given all the superior formats that we have readily available to us, including streaming services and Blu-ray. Now, to turn the console off, or really to put it into sleep mode, all we need to do is press and hold the PS button for around 10 seconds. And turning it back on is as easy as pressing the PS button again. So as far as using the PS Placeable, that's pretty much all the features. However, let's say you want to change up the button configuration. Well, that brings me to the last feature, which is the web app that Steven developed. So we're actually going to need to hop on over to the computer to check that out. In order to update or change the controller configuration, all you need to do is head over to the Retro ModWorks website and hit the BT web app button at the top right corner. From here, you can click on Configuration and then Load Mappings. A window will then appear with Bluetooth discoverable devices that you can connect to. Now, moving back over to the PS Placeable, press and hold the mode button for a couple seconds. The LED should now be blinking 3 times, indicating it is in Bluetooth mode. You should now see a device labeled either BP32 or BluePad32. Click it and then select Pair. Once connected, you'll see the PSP, and at least for now, an image of a PS4 controller. The default configuration is already perfect. X is X, square is square, etc. But if for whatever reason you wanted to change the mapping, all you need to do is select the button you want to configure on the PSP, and then press the button on the controller that you want it to be mapped to. It's honestly super simple. You can see all of the mappings on the left-hand part of the screen, and once you're happy with everything, simply press the Save Mappings button on the top left. You can even change things like the color of the LED on the controller, making each profile unique, which is great when toggling between the different mapping profiles. Steven will continue to refine the web app in the future and will include different controller images for other controllers such as the Switch Pro controller and some of the other more popular 8BitDo controllers. Now, once all your profiles are saved, we can actually cycle through each of them on the fly by pressing L3. For example, having a custom profile for PS1 games is extremely useful since the PSP used the analog stick for L2 and R2. Since we actually have those buttons on our Bluetooth controller, we can just map those functions to those buttons. This is honestly huge, since playing PS1 titles that utilize these secondary triggers are extremely uncomfortable to play. Having the ability to map these properties will make playing these games far easier and way more enjoyable. Anyway, those are the primary features. For more details, I would definitely refer to the various guides on the Retro ModWorks website, which I'll have linked down below. Alright, so now let's go ahead and go over the pros and cons of the PS Placeable mod. Starting with the pros, the biggest one is being able to finally play PSP games using original hardware on the big screen completely untethered to the console. It's a great way to experience PSP titles given just how high quality the games are, essentially being almost on par with full-on home console titles of the time. Another pro is the build process, which overall is fairly easy with minimal soldering, especially if you opt to purchase a pre-spliced and extended power cable, which is an option offered on the Retro ModWorks store. Additionally, this is a great way to salvage PSPs with damaged screens like the one that I used for this video. This very much falls in line with the ethos of don't cannibalize to consolize. It's always nice to give these otherwise unusable systems a second lease on life. Now, another fantastic pro is of course the button mapping feature, specifically when it comes to non-PSP games such as original PlayStation titles. As an example, some of these games such as Silent Hill require extensive use of L2 and R2. R2 in particular is pretty important because that's how you draw your weapon. The only problem is that the PSP hardware doesn't have secondary triggers like a PlayStation controller does. Sony's workaround for this was mapping those functions to the analog stick, which makes gameplay fairly cumbersome. But since we can now use a traditional PlayStation controller, we can map those appropriately, which makes playing these original PS1 titles as intended and far more enjoyable. Now, something that's really incredible is that since the Placeable mod enables wireless Bluetooth controller support, the PSP can now be accessible to those who may not be able to use conventional controllers. While modern consoles nowadays have accessibility options such as the adaptive controller from Microsoft, options like this didn't really exist for portables like the PSP. But with the Bluetooth capabilities of the PS Placeable, that option is now available, which is absolutely fantastic news for the community and opens the PSP library to an even broader audience. I mean, how amazing is that? And lastly, this is a non-destructive mod that is completely reversible. The only cutting required is for the power cable, but this is a readily available part that you could even purchase separately from Retro ModWorks while retaining your original. Anyway, there's really just a ton of pros and things to like about this project. But now let's get into the cons. Overall, I love this kit, but there are a few issues, some of which aren't the fault of the kit itself, but rather the PSP hardware. And that particular issue that I'm alluding to with the PSP is scaling. You see, one of the main issues that the PSP suffers from is that when connected to the television, the video output is severely windowed due to a mismatch in resolution. This is inherent in the console itself and not the mod kit. To fix this issue, if you have a scaling device like a RetroTink, you can actually zoom the image in to make it fit the full screen. So really, to get the full benefit of having a kit like the PS Placeable, you will need some ability to zoom in and scale the video output. Again, this is not an issue with the mod kit, but it is something to consider. Which actually brings me to another con. While the video output quality of the component cables is fantastic, I would love to have seen a HDMI output option. Using something like the High-Speed I Do kit really would have rounded off the build and even provided an integrated scaling solution. But of course, that kit has its own issues. The biggest one being, in my opinion, the removal of the UMD drive, which if that was included in this kit would have been a deal breaker because I think having the UMD drive is an absolute must. And the final drawback is the use of mismatched ribbon cables when connecting the PSP motherboard to the Bluetooth board. While it's not a significant issue, I understand the reasoning behind it. Since this mod is compatible with both PSP 2000 and 3000 models, using a single board that works with both revisions is more cost-effective and logistically simpler. Given this, the mismatch isn't a major concern by any measure, but just something I wanted to mention. And really, that's it. Overall, this is a fantastic kit and a great way to repurpose damaged PSP consoles. Both Steven and Dan did a fantastic job here, and I love that we can finally enjoy the PSP comfortably on the big screen. Well folks, there you have it. The PS Placeable, a kit that integrates Bluetooth controller support into the PSP to give us a true home console experience. Now, as a side note, you may have noticed I've been rocking these pretty sweet Macho Nacho shirts throughout the video. Ariel of Artistic Pixels has just started making these high quality t-shirts, not just for my channel, but other ones as well like Retro RGB and My Life in Gaming. If you want to check them out, I'll leave a link to the store in the description below. It's a great way to support these channels, as well as a small US-based business. Ariel has some really cool designs with more on the way, plus some great stickers too. Again, I'll leave a link to the Artistic Pixel store in the video description. Anyway, if you enjoyed this video, I really think you'll like this one here, so check it out. And as always, thank you all so much for tuning in today, and I'll catch you again next time.